was still having 4 or 5 seizures a day. I was told I had a brain tumor and that they would cut it out, and they didn't know if the surgery would fix the seizures. We moved to this hippie commune. We lived on the river and we had chickens and dogs, and there were lots of families of other kids around us. So, we went swimming in the river every day, and we had a really tight-knit little community on that dirt road. I think I felt different before I became a sick kid. Like, my father's from America and he's a very emotionally sensitive man. He's from quite an alternative upbringing, so he has a man bun and a lungi back before man buns were fashionable. And my mother is the breadwinner and she went to work and she had the career, and that's very different from all the other parents in far north Queensland. I was that weird sick kid. My parents initially took me to a GP and he diagnosed me with epilepsy. My life kind of became a stop motion where I'd be in a conversation or an experience and then everybody else would keep going and I would just jump and I'd miss this whole chunk. Like, I'd be walking with my friends or family and then all of a sudden they'd be 100 meters ahead of me because I just stopped. I was just dealing with developing these insecurities around feeling left behind. For example, like, we were walking up the steps to my home and I was carrying a boogie board and behind my godmothers and my sisters, and I had a seizure at the top of the stairs, and the next thing I knew I was at the bottom of the stairs and everyone at the top of the stairs were looking at me in this horrified, shocked expression, and I interpreted that as being in trouble, even though they were horrified that they just let me fall down the stairs. I wasn't allowed to do the things that my sisters were allowed to do, which frustrated me to no ends, but also, I think, taught me that I didn't have the same capacity as them. I can understand it, seizures are terrifying, even as a doctor seeing them in a hospital, it's frightening. I got pulled out of school and that kind of kick-started then a long-winded period of investigation before they worked out what was going on for me. They kept increasing the dose of my anti-epileptics and I was still having 4 or 5 seizures a day, and my parents went back to that GP and asked for the MRI brain. I was told I had a brain tumor and that they would cut it out. They didn't know if the surgery would fix the seizures, but I was so relieved, even as a young child, to at least know what was going on with me. Leading up to the surgery, the trajectory was that my seizures were just getting worse and worse. My parents were told, she's going to be dependent on you for the rest of her existence. She won't be able to drive, she won't be able to have kids, and that's what they were expecting for the rest of my life. The only time I felt frightened was when we actually went in for surgery and Mum and Dad were stopped at the edge of the theatre, and then they walked me into the theatre space and they put me under, and I remember being frightened then and also pissed off at the anaesthetist because he didn't let me finish counting down from 10 to 1. They cut a small section out of my skull and removed it, and then circumcised out the brain tumor. And so on my MRI scans, you can see there's a portion missing in my brain. I came back to far north Queensland and I had follow-up MRIs every 6 months, which were scary and uncomfortable as a child, being told to lay still and getting put through a loud machine that sounds like a war zone going around your head. And then I had to go to high school. I hadn't been in a secular system. I'd been the sick kid, I was behind. And I remember having this thought at the time that I'd failed all these subjects, that it must be because they took a portion of my brain away. Like, I was 12 when I had that thought. That was comforting to me, kind of let me off the hook. And it was in grade 10, so I was about 15, and I'd sat this exam. He gave me an A, and I think that one A really blew up that thought. From then on, I thought, well, I can do this, I have done this. I became the top 10% of my cohort in high school, and doing that changed me from being the weird kid to the nerdy kid as a teenager, to fit in like the next social hierarchy of boxes, because I was smart, I made sense to the other kids. When I was little, Dad and I were very close, and Mum and I not so much. She was, you know, the breadwinner. She worked hard. You know, Dad did the bus run, Dad did the ironing, Dad brushed our hair. Dad was a manny plus an artist, so when we were at school, he'd go to his art studio and he'd paint his paintings, and then he'd pick us up from the bus. And then my dad became unwell with mental illness when I was a teenager, and that really ripped the rug out from underneath all of us. You know, it completely changed the human that my dad was. It was like, it was his shell of a body, but the person inside him was completely different. And in that time, I was also studying really hard. It was almost addictive in some way to watch myself climb that academic ladder and feel validation. You know, with Dad sort of out of the picture with his mental illness, everything in the house was just kind of hanging on by a thread, I guess. And so there wasn't much space there for like affirming and encouragement. I seem to have found that in validating myself. I had a crush on the boy next door, and his sister thought I'd impress him if I chose medicine, so I put medicine down, and then I got in, and you know, I didn't think much of it. And then a month or so later, I was at a folk festival with my family, and I checked the messages on my phone, and there was a message there from the Dean of Medicine saying that he would like to offer me a position. And I kind of had to listen to it again, and then I listened to it a third time. I was like, yep, okay, I did hear that right. And then we were sitting on this hill at the time, and I said to my parents, I think I got into medicine. Like, I was still not convinced. And Dad stood up in front of everyone and shouted to all these strangers, my daughter got into medicine. And all these strangers and kids and trees clapped for me. I went to medical school, which, you know, was a bit of a bummer really, because here I am in medical school with all these other intelligent people from Australia and around the world, and like immediately I'm like plain average, like barely average. And so, you know, like med school's hard, it's like academically challenging, and I couldn't validate myself based on where I came in this ladder. Like, that is incredibly freeing to give yourself permission to be who you are. I actually think it's made me really empathetic, which, you know, is a weird thing to say, because in medicine, when you deal with people suffering constantly, you get extremely empathy fatigued. Like, of course you care, but actively, openly, expressively care. All doctors get fatigued. Like, burnout's huge amongst junior doctors, all doctors at all levels. And, you know, it's actually humanly impossible to carry everybody's suffering, especially within the culture of medicine that doesn't allow you space to process that. Like, I have never in my career seen another doctor cry. You are conditioned when you're brought into medicine. From the day you start in med school, you're being conditioned and nourished into the culture of medicine, and at the same time, you're young, you're so consumed by your exams and your assignments and just life and learning how to be an adult and change a light bulb and pay an electric bill and do a rental application. You don't really look up until you're already there. Once you hit internship and you're there on day dot as a junior doctor, you get exposed to this whole new culture and you feel like the black sheep because nobody else is talking about how terrible it is or how toxic the system is. Doctors brush up against your boobs. Well, you're in a closed space, and you know, why should that bother me? You have to fit elbows and instruments inside this abdomen. Why should I get to be bothered by the fact that someone's elbow is constantly running over my breasts? And having nobody react and thinking, are we actually okay with this? And something like over 70% of junior doctors fear speaking up about the way they're treated because there's this fear that you'll throw your career away, and you invest so much and you give over your entire 20s to become a doctor, to get into the system, to build relationships and get onto a program. And even that is competitive because of the bottleneck, and there's so much pressure to get experience and to make yourself look good that it paralyzes you to speak up for yourself, because there's all this fear around being blacklisted or a consultant being buddies with another consultant in a hospital and them bad-mouthing your name, and boom, there's your career gone. Doctors find escapes in alcohol and drugs, and you just find other ways of coping, or you don't. And we want to believe that we can work these insane long shifts and do these mammoth tasks and hold the amount of information in our minds that we do. Then sometimes your patients trigger you, or your colleagues do, in ways that you don't understand, and there's no safe space in medicine to talk about that. I wrote about my experiences. My book's called Intern, and it is a fictionalized autobiography of my first few years of being a doctor. And in doing so, in sort of starting this novel and this path, I started to talk to other junior doctors and really discover that lots of people were feeling the same way that I was. Junior doctors are giving ground up support because that's the only way we know how to cope, helping each other or being there for each other, even though it's supposed to come from the top down. There has been change, but it's not fast enough. We're still getting junior doctor suicides every single year in Australia, and it's such a waste of a life. Being a doctor has taught me a lot about the depth of humanity. When you're a doctor and sit with your patient and give them space, they want to share their life with you. It means so much to them that has really impacted me or influenced me, because being in hospital and being a sick person is one of the more vulnerable times of your life. When you're on the other side of that, when you're in the power seat, you feel your own inadequacies and you feel your own, vulnerabilities in a situation, but you're the doctor. Everyone's looking at you. You have to buckle down and put on that mask and be confident, or be what you feel like the situation needs. I needed a lot more of Mum's influence in my life, and she helped me apply for unis and do my assignments, and I think my relationship with my mum has grown a huge amount since then. And now I'm very close to both my parents and we have a really good relationship. I think we all set limitations on ourselves in life and we all have the capacity to undo those. And like everybody has their stuff and everyone has their circumstances.